This is the story about the Nightmare Room. I've been in therapy for years, dealing with this problem or the other. It's really helped me over the time, and I'm glad I've utilized the option. However, my last experience wasn't a particularly good one. I'm kind of afraid, a lot. I have phobia for most things. I won't go through the list. Just know that it's led to me having a very closed off life. I recently started seeing a new therapist who works in experimental therapy. More specifically, what's called immersion therapy. This, as I'm sure you could guess, is where you essentially confront your fears head on. This therapist, Dr. Stevens, however, does a different type of immersion therapy, using a method that actually made it appealing to me in the first place. His way is gone about by including lucid dreaming and using methods to control the contents of the dream. This all takes place in a laboratory used for sleep studies and a designed space called the Directed Phobia Engagement Area, referred to as the Nightmare Room. I'm going to describe what happened to me during this new type of therapy. After weeks of preparation, a multitude of forms, and much second guessing, my appointment for the Nightmare Room came. As I said, there was a Clink study lab where the Nightmare Room is located. The place is state of the art, and the Nightmare Room is located in the basement. My therapist was especially excited for my experiment session because we'd been dealing with multiple fears, and before, they had only done one at a time. After the waiting room and all the preparation, I stripped down to nothing but my underwear, went into the room, and was hooked up to monitors. I was also hooked up to an IV, which I found strange, but I trusted the term. I was told to close my eyes and focus on the sound of clicking. I did this for about 5 minutes, and I must have fallen asleep, because I suddenly heard a woman's voice say, "Open your eyes." And I did. I was laying in the same position I was when I closed my eyes, but I couldn't move. It felt like I was paralyzed, which is exactly as it had been described as feeling. I was told that there would be things going on I was aware of, such as commands for the fears I was overcoming. What I would hear in my case were the different phases we were entering, and sure enough, after a short while of laying there in silence, I heard the same voice from the woman over the speaker say, "Phase 1. It was at the moment that I realized I had no idea which phase represented which fear, and anxiety swept over me. I knew the fears I'd been dealing with were claustrophobia, a fear of small spaces or feeling crowded; arochophobia, a fear of spiders; trypanophobia, a fear of needles; and colophobia, a fear of clowns. I closed my eyes and braced myself for what might be coming. The similar voice came over the speaker again. "Open your eyes." I obeyed. If I was going to endure this, I wanted it to work. With my eyes open, I waited for what felt like an eternity. After however long it was, I felt something in my foot. I tried to look down, but I couldn't move my hand. I straightened my eyes downwards and saw the tips of my toes above my torso. I kept feeling something, first on my feet, then my legs. Finally, I saw what it was. Tarantulas. Large, hairy tarantulas. Crawling inside me. Some unknown location at the foot of the bed. I seized up my fear. I was breathing heavily, and I kept myself sweating. 5 tarantulas crawled up my body, and I felt 2 of them bite me on my stomach and chest. Respectfully, I began hyperventilating, praying this would all be over. Every time I squeezed my eyes shut, the voice would come back over the speakers, telling me to open them back up. I almost passed out when 2 of them crawled up my neck and onto my face. One burrowed its way into my mouth, inspected around a bit, then crawled away. It was without a doubt the most horrifying 5 minutes of my entire life. Someone came in after the 5 minutes, dressed head to toe in white, complete with a surgical mask and a white cap. They removed the spiders and left the room. The voice came over the speaker. Phase 2. Phase 2 was much different than the first. In my dream state, it was as if I was being wheeled out in the room by a team of people all in white, and Dr. Stevens. We went into the elevator and up a floor. We went to an area that was sort of like a closed-in patio. As far as I could tell in my sleep paralysis, I felt a warm breeze against my skin. It straightened my eyes to take note of my surroundings. But before I could make a note of anything, my bed was lifted and then lowered into a box of some sort. That was just wider and longer than the surface of the bed itself. It then clicked in my mind this was going to be claustrophobia. Sure enough, a lid was placed over the box, with the space of all the wires connected to me to run out, and a few air holes above my face. It was pitch dark inside the box, save for the holes. I then felt the box being lowered into something. Then something hit the top of the box, and again, and again. And it continued until something began coming through the holes. It was dirt. I felt cold dirt hit my face and tasted it on my lips. I was being buried alive again. My heart began to race faster than a speeding bullet. I felt my stomach somehow drop, like we had just deceived the first drop of a roller coaster, and I felt nauseous. I don't know how long I was down there, but eventually I heard the dirt on top of the casket being removed. It felt like I was down there, hypothetically, for at least an hour. In reality, it was probably just 5 minutes of me being in the face of my dream. At one point, I reminded myself that I was just asleep in a room, and everything I was feeling wasn't real. But it did little to calm me down. After a while, I was brought back up from where I was lowered, and wheeled back to the room where this whole experiment started. The voice came back after a few minutes. Phase 3. I knew ahead of time this one was going to be either clowns or needles, and I did as much as I could to mentally prepare myself. Still, being in this state of sleep paralysis was beginning to affect me mentally. As far as the stress of not being able to move went, I wanted to wake myself up. I wanted to joint myself awake, and for this all to be over. But I knew I couldn't. No matter how much I wanted it to be done, it was up to the doctor to wake me up. This nightmare would continue until it had seen its way through. Then phase 3 began. One of the assistants in all white propped up in the back of the bed, putting me in a sitting position. Finally, I was able to see more than just the top of my torso and my toes. I actually thought for a second that that was a good thing. What happened next made me wish that they weren't basically forcing me to keep my eyes open. A door that blended in with the wall I was facing opened, and then walked 3 of the most horrifying clowns I have ever seen. Scratch that, they were the 3 most horrifying clowns I have ever seen. And on top of that, they each had a bag of syringes in both hands, like a large Ziploc bag filled to the brim with needles. If I were capable of screaming, I would have been. At the absolute top of my lungs, the clown danced around for a few minutes, each projecting a distant, familiar, yet unique version of the traditional clown laughter. The lights in the nightmare room changed to a colorful and carnival music played over the speakers. This was crafted to literally be my absolute worst nightmare. After prancing around and getting all in my face, licking my cheeks, rubbing their faces against mine, and genuinely intruding on my personal space, the clowns began part 2 of phase 3. They each took turns brandishing needles. They rubbed them all over the front of the body, traced my vines with the tip of the needles, and stuck them into my skin in various spots, and followed it by placing small circular bandages over the wound. Phase 3 lasted the longest of the phases, and I was ready to jump out of my skin. I was poked and prodded so many times that I became used to the pain of having needles slid into my skin. All the while, the carnival song played. The clowns continued dancing and hopping around while teasing me with the syringes. They brought them close to my eyes, and I fought every instant I had not to close them because, as I said, I wanted this therapy to work. I kept reasoning with myself that this was all a dream. I was still just laying on the bed in an empty room, nearing the completion of this horrific order. Just when I thought it was about to be over, one of the clowns dumped a box full of spiders on me. Big, small, hairy, you name it. There were even centipedes thrown in for good measure. They crawled all over me for what seemed like an eternity. I felt the bites from the spiders mixed in with another wave of being poked with needles. All while I was surrounded and feeling very claustrophobic by the personal space invaded group of clowns. This was the final. I couldn't scream. I couldn't ask them to stop. I couldn't do anything. I just had to remind myself that this wasn't real. This was all I could do. Spiders crawled all over my eyes, my open eyes. Clowns laughed in my face, and I was feeling so claustrophobic that I was barely breathing. Suddenly, the bed tripped back. An authentic mask was put all over my face, and the woman's voice on the speaker told me to count backwards from 100. I obliged, figuring this was the process through which I'd be released from my sleep paralysis. I got to about 92 when I drifted off. Everything became blurry, and the last thing I saw was 3 terrifying, smiling clowns holding spiders and syringes. I thought in my head, when I wake up, I will be perfectly fine and untouched, in the same room this all began in, and hopefully this ordeal will have been worth it and I will no longer have these fears. Well, I woke up. I was in my apartment. I got up from my bed, confused. I didn't remember anything after the end of my sleep paralysis. I didn't remember my talk with Dr. Stevens. I didn't remember my post-therapy session. And I didn't remember being discharged from the facility. I walked into my bathroom and looked in the mirror. My face was covered in dried dirt and what looked like small bites mark. In addition to what I'm guessing were flakes of various colored paints that had been transferred into my face from some other surface. My arms, torso, and legs were riddled with small, circular bandages, underneath which were countless, tiny needle-sized holes. Only now has my memory of the therapy come back.